So I'm incredibly excited today to be able to welcome Kris Hammond, one of our most popular speakers. Kris is the CTO of an amazing company called Narrative Science. He's also on the faculty at Northwestern, professor of journalism and and computer science.
Computer science.
Thank you. Yes. And before joining Northwestern, he's the one who opened up the Artificial Intelligence Lab at the University of Chicago, launched that. So welcome, Kris. We're delighted to have you here with us today. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. This is I'm looking forward to this conversation in this, for me, a relatively new medium of getting together with people. I thought I'd just go ahead.
Before you jump in, why don't we take one second and just ask the other people who are joining us today in the roundtable to just introduce themselves. So why don't we start?
That would be the polite thing to
do. Zem, why don't you start?
Okay. I'm Zem Joaquin, and I'm the founder of ecofabulous.com. I'm also eBay's eco expert and love the art of storytelling.
Welcome. Paul?
Hi, so I'm Paul Bennun. I'm the Chief Creative Officer of Somethin Else. We are a content design and creation company in the UK. We tell stories for brands, broadcasters and publishers. And I'm also the chair of an organisation called Art Angel, which is an arts commissioning organisation over here in London.
Welcome. Okay, next, let's go sort of right to left.
Is that me?
Yes.
Yes, Nancye Green from New York, a few blocks from Charlie. I had the privilege of attending the Snug Harbor event, which was extraordinary. I've been involved in storytelling in every medium possible, from museum exhibitions to graphic to now digital. And it's a very exciting time to be doing this.
Thank you. Lynn?
Oh, hi, I'm Lynn Rosen. I'm the editorial director of two trade magazines, Book Business and Publishing Executive magazines. And we tell the stories about the people in the industry who are telling stories.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you. So glad to have you all here. Kris, I thought maybe we could ask you to share a little bit about narrative science and some of the impressive work that you guys are doing.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So narrative science is a company and that has a technology that is able to take raw structured data, that is numbers and symbols, and if there's a story to be told in that data, our technology is able to figure that story out and tell it. And when I say tell the story, I mean actually create human readable and what looks like human written. Human written text that actually explains not just what's happening at the data level, but really figures out what insights are in the story and articulates those. We actually started off living in the world of sports. That is, we took box scores, line scores, and play-by-play data from college baseball games and wrote game recaps. Actually our first client was the Big Ten Network, where we were literally writing game recaps for them in real time based upon the data we would get at the end of the game. But we very quickly understood that the technology scoped not just beyond sports and not just beyond media, but really scoped into the world of what tends to be referred to as big data. And that is the data that's being amassed for and by large organizations so they can understand what's going on inside those organizations from a logistics point of view, from a sales point of view, from a performance point of view. And these companies have really been daunted by the fact that they're looking at data and they're not looking at the story, they're not looking at the insight. And so what we really do is we work very hard to turn that data into something that someone can actually read and understand. And also while we're doing this, we're taking a look more and more at sort of public data sources, government data sources, and actually for me, one of my favorite things, data about student performance in the educational realm, where we can actually create a personal experience, communication that is absolutely indistinguishable from something they would get from the best professors, the best teachers, but we could do it at scale and actually explain to them what they've done right, what they've done wrong, what they need to do better, what they should focus on. And that's actually the beauty of the technology, is any data, any insight that's in that data, we can get to it and we can articulate it, we can communicate it. So that's the baseline of what we do.
So for anyone who hasn't watched it, we made a wonderful short film with Kris that's available on the futureofstorytelling.org website, and I highly recommend that you check it out as a good introduction to your work and to the work of narrative science. So let me start off the questions by throwing out the one that sort of sticks in my mind most, having come from the book publishing world, and that is, Kris, are computers going to put authors out of business? Is this going to be the end of human journalism and writing? Are all the stories going to be written by computers in the future?
You know, it's the end of all things human. The slow but steady encroachment of the machine on our lives is now complete. No, absolutely not. The technology is a powerful technology, and it's a disruptive technology, and that is that it will change things. But the reality is that it has a limit, and it's a very straightforward limit, and that is, if the data doesn't exist, then the system can't tell a story. In particular, in the world of journalism, there are a set of stories that can be told directly from the data, and we can certainly tell all those stories. But there is another class of story and another class of different kind of journalism that we can't touch yet, and that is that moment where the insight comes not from the data but from the world, from experience, and a new story is created by having someone make the right phone call, go to the right place, ask the right question. But in the world of data as it stands today, there is no place that this technology won't go. And that is to say that any kind of analysis that you need, any kind of story that you need to hear, any kind of evidence you need to be pulled out of the data and turned into something that's a real communication for you, the technology can do. And so I think what we're going to see is a tremendous amount of disruption in the worlds of business, education, healthcare, where there's tremendous data, but a painful lack of communication. Ironically, a painful lack of humanization of that data. And this technology, because it really is an approach to taking what people do and having the machine do it for us. It's an approach to humanizing the machine. We can actually create human, personal, focused, relevant communication at scale in a way that people just don't have the time or resources to do right now.
You know,
Sorry.
Oh. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask about relevance. It seems like it would be incredibly valuable in the world of environmental science and global warming, and also how to communicate, the vernacular better, because we've had a very difficult time with communication around global warming. And Charlie knows better than anybody, as he's written many books with Al Gore on this. But I'm just curious. Have you already crunched the data on that? Is there work being done there? Because it seems like it would be something very valuable for someone like me. So does global warming actually resonate, or is it something about urgency, or what have you found in that realm?
It's a realm we haven't gone into as a company because we're a tiny company. We're just starting up. But I think that you're actually spot on, and that is we have, as humans, we have the ability to understand the narrative, to understand the story, that our skills there far exceed our skills in understanding data, even understanding visualizations. The people will often, when they look at our technology, say, well, aren't visualizations good enough? Because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And it's like, yes, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but the reason why we say that is words are the coin of the realm. That's what we want. That's what we use in our communication. So with regard to global warming, we have, I mean, we're chasing a client right now who is very interested in that realm about global warming and sustainability, and it's something that we actually want to do quite badly. In that that kind of work is, I think, an expression of the capability of the technology that both is something that does good for the world while also doing well for us as a company. And so that's actually an area we want to look at. In general, we have found that for a lot of scientific data, for a lot of data that the government releases, there's this push toward transparency. There's this push toward transparency, but it's transparency to data as opposed to transparency of the insight associated with it.
So there's one thing I'm interested in, which is that obviously a story that's made by a human is designed to change someone or to change something, and that's something that a human knows how to do, and arguably a system, a computer, doesn't. To what degree are the stories that your technology outputs input first by a human being before they can be recombined and served out? If that makes sense.
No, that actually makes an absolute sense. So you want to think about our technology as the framework for a skilled writer that is inexperienced. And whenever we look at a new data set and we consider writing a story, there are really two questions that we end up asking. And the first question is, sort of, what does the data look like? And the second is, what does the story look like? And then we actually have a staff of our editorial staff, which really comes to a great extent out of journalism, that have skills in making that, figuring out how to move that data into fact, how to figure out what angles are true, how to figure out how to structure the story, and then how to actually apply language to make that story happen. And so they'll configure the system around a data set and around a story. And then the system will, for any new data that matches up with that data type, will write new stories. Now, part of all of that is understanding our audience. And it's actually a huge component of the technology that we are able to embed a point of view in the actual processing. And so if you know, we have some clients that where we manage some of their customer communication, and we'll say how their work is performing, how their work for their client, their customer is performing, and that kind of communication is tends to be very positive, focusing on the positive elements, talking about the things that have gone wrong in whatever the particular campaign was that they were running, but really is focused on how to fix what's gone wrong. Now, that same data is also used to create communication to the team that's running all this, and that communication is very different. It's not all that. I mean, if things have gone wrong, it's very focused on these are the mistakes you made. This is what you need to fix. Same data. Same processing, same understanding of what's happened, but different audiences and different points of view and different intent aimed at those audiences. And as a result, very different kinds of stories, very different kinds of narratives, very different kinds of reporting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Okay. We also have, just so you know, on the sports side, we actually have the system has a notion of the home team and the away team. And so, you know, even if the home team loses, you really don't want to make them look like idiots in the story. And so, talking about all the great things they did, even though they lost, is sort of part and parcel of what we do with the technology.
So you have a whole new class of bug, which is sort of etiquette, the bug.
In some sense.
Kris, do you see, as there's this explosion of big data taking place today, that we're going to have an explosion of storytelling? Are we in line for some sort of new renaissance in the number and amount and quality of stories told?
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, in part, it's because I think that the notion of the story, the narrative, is going to end up superseding communication, for lack of a better word, that's what you want to call it. That's around things like spreadsheets and even visualizations. I think that what we're going to find is that particularly in the up and coming generation, sort of short form, to the point, goal-focused communication, that is natural language communication, stories, narratives, are going to be preferred over everything else. So, and that even the visualization is going to some extent, be weakened because there's such a stronger mode of communication, and that's the story.
Well, I have a question, just having come through a political campaign where there was a lot of storytelling and not a lot of fact in some cases. I'm wondering, what I'm intrigued with is the ability to support story narrative with data, as opposed to simply creating narrative out of data. So that I'm wondering about that in engagement of truth, you know, or something that is evidence-based that might sit within the narrative thread.
Well, there were a couple things. One, you know, I'm a huge fan of Nate Silver. I mean, as you might expect, me living in the data world.
Exactly.
I think that, but I think that the world of data-driven storytelling is actually a super important one. I mean, it's always been a huge thing in journalism.
Sure.
And it's growing. I think it's growing in terms of other places. But I think what's important in terms of our technology is that you end up with a story. But each element in the story, and this is actually sort of a powerful moment, each and every element in the story can be traced back to the individual data elements, the analysis, the decisions that were made to actually express that element. And I mean down to the word level. And the notion is that if you want to, and you look at a story, you can find out exactly why that story was told, and exactly how it was grounded in the data. And I think that ends up being, for a lot of people, although actually not a huge number, but for many people, that ends up being tremendously important. And for us, I think it also means that we can actually establish a kind of credibility around what we express, what we say, that really comes from people understanding the analytics, the source of the data, and all of the decisions that were made in the creation of the story.
Well, so you're building a brand about truth and narration, really, truth and narrative. And if you think about it, it's kind of the Intel Inside model, that if you know if it comes from you, it's got to be true. It's a very interesting notion.
I mean, I think that is, certainly on our business side, that's the core of it. Although I have to admit, you know, it is possible, although it's transparent, it is possible to have the system have bias. That is, but it's absolutely visible to you. And so the notion that you could have, for example, two sports writers that are really the same system, that have different biases with regard to how they're going to explain how a game went, would not be an unreasonable thing for us to do. We're very much focused on what we call an audience of one. and that is really being able to write stories down to the individual level. But we also have the notion of the storyteller, the unique storyteller, the storyteller with the point of view. And we could have thousands of storytellers all telling the same story from the same data, but with different takes and different views and different nuance in terms of the story and the language and the points they really want to emphasize. And that's actually kind of fun for us. But ground truth is it's absolutely the truth of the story is absolutely transparent in what we do.
Very impressive. I love that idea of telling stories on the personal level. And I know you've spoken about that before, this idea of the long tail of storytelling, and that you're being able to supply the tools that will enable individual stories that are relevant to one or two or a small group of people that otherwise would never have their story told. Can you talk a little bit about that, Kris?
Sure. And I think this goes back to a couple of things, a couple of projects that we have. So we have a very clear notion of a particular kind of use of this technology, and that is literally being able to take a global story and bring it down to relevance for the individual. Or to actually tell the stories that no one is telling because no one has the time or the energy or the resources to tell them. And on a very, I wouldn't say frivolous, but on a very more entertainment and more what's a good word for it? Less, I would say, less broadly valuable point of view. We write stories for Little League games, and there's a company called Game Changer that we get data from, and we write stories from that data, and we give it back to them, and they publish those stories on their site. Last year we published almost 400,000 stories for them, wrote and published for them, and this year we wrote about 2 million, or we will be writing about 2 million. Any given story will be read by maybe 5 people. And for the entire rest of the world, that story is irrelevant, is trivial. But for those 5 people, it's a great story. It's the story of a kid who just played a baseball game, and maybe some family members were there, and he gets to go online and find a story of that game that mentions whatever he did in AP style. That's something he can hold and he can keep and he can share. And so while it's not valuable to the rest of the world, it's tremendously valuable to that individual. On a more sort of socially impactful side, we just finished up a piece of work with ProPublica, where they had a tremendous amount of data around schools, and in particular data around the educational opportunities that the schools provided, and advanced educational opportunities. A few pieces of data around the economic health of the school, measured through various proxies. Really, what the economic conditions of the kids who were at that school, and they had it nationwide. Now they can't write the individual stories for the individual schools, but they gave us the data, and we configured the system to write the individual stories, writing tens of thousands of stories, which means that a parent can look at their kid's school or their potential kids, their kid's potential school, and actually see a story about how that school is doing, what it's providing, whether or not and looking at the correlations for a more sort of socially active population, looking at whether or not the gaps in the opportunities are actually correlating with the economic gaps, and then comparing that school to other schools in the district, other schools in the state, other schools who are under similar economic conditions, other schools that are under similar have similar opportunities, with the idea that we can communicate a story of every single school in the country to the people who care about it. Now, the individuals who care about that, we're talking, hundreds. But you don't. If I'm in a newsroom, I'm never going to convince anybody that I should write a story that's going to be read by hundreds of people. You have to get that number up pretty high before you're allowed to write a story. But because we have a technology that can do it, we can write that story, which again is not all that meaningful to most of the world, but to the people for whom it is part of their decision-making process, it's tremendously valuable, tremendously impactful.
So I'm sorry I have to leave you. This is so interesting. I enjoyed your roundtable at the conference, and I hope to see you again at the next one. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Bye, Nancy.
I have a question.
Please go ahead, Lynn.
Like you, Charlie, I come from the book business, and you asked if computers were going to replace authors. I'm thinking about this availability of all this big data that we suddenly have in the book publishing industry from e-readers in terms of stories that might be told about the readers and what kinds of stories are going to come out, what we're going to learn about how people read and why people read, and how this might affect authors and the way they tell their stories.
I don't know how much data gathering is being done off of the e-reader dynamic. But it's very much the case that you probably can track, as someone who's looking at a book in terms of reading it through an e-reader, you can track those places, those passages, those chapters where people can't stop, and note those chapters where, in fact, they stop and start a lot, and put together a report on the readability of a book. I'm not sure I would do that because that seems to be the kind of information that I, as a writer, would not maybe want to have. But we can, I think, as more and more of our behavioral, more and more of our behavior is online and is tracked, it can actually turn out to be tremendously useful for us. Particularly if we actually believe that if we understand ourselves better, we can do a better job of taking care of ourselves. And so understanding when we eat badly and when we don't exercise and when we're not sleeping well enough, and having an early morning conversation with a system that's not telling you about the data, but is saying, you probably shouldn't have eaten that piece of pie last night. You put on a few more ounces, or you might consider going to bed earlier tonight, and sort of giving you, again, not at the data level, but just at a conversational level, giving you alerts, giving you suggestions, and helping you, because it's tracking you, understanding you, and then articulating what it's found to you. That, I think, is super exciting. And I do think, but I think the world of publishing and the world of authoring, that's going to be part and parcel of it.
I'm just curious. Well, you just mentioned all this data that seems really relevant for companies like Up or Fuel Band or Fitbit. So, are you contemplating working with one of them? Or are you saying that this is data that you would that you work on separate, or is that proprietary and I can't know right now?
No. We're not working with any of them yet. We're not working with any of them yet. Right now, we as a company, it's interesting. When you talk to me, there are always two people you're talking to. On one hand, you're talking to a technologist with a technology. On the other hand, you're talking to a CTO with a technology that's in a company that needs to make money. And so we tend to be fairly focused right now on a few core sectors. We do a lot of work in financial services, online marketing services, some exploratory work in pharmaceutical, and sort of performance review in hospitality. We look at a lot of the rest of the world as well, but those are our sort of our core foci right now.
But what do you mean about crunching the data in terms of personal data related to health?
I got to tell you, I mean, the more and more of what we can grab hold of and do things with is coming online. I mean, anyone who's got a heart monitor, a pedometer, who goes to a gym and just notes weights and reps. As that data moves online, it can become more and more part of your narrative, and that's actually a real something I'm how do I put it? I'm driven by, and that is there is a story of your life that is ever changing, and right now there's a tremendous amount of that story is captured by others. But the notion that we can capture and utilize the story of our lives and have it be given to a system that can think about how we're doing and talk to us. When I say talk, I mean it might be in terms of your cell phone and a few messages. It might be a real conversation, but it's all supported by the notion of a technology that can take that data, run analytics across it, and then have a communication with you. But that's me talking from the technologist side, where that's actually within the core capabilities of the technology we have. It's not necessarily what we will work on tomorrow. Although it's, for me, this is one of those things where I'll take that phone call and talk about what the possibilities are, because it's such a rich. There's such a rich set of possibilities in the world of data right now that it would be a sin to ignore that we could take those, we can take all the skills that data scientists have developed by dealing with companies and dealing with networks and dealing with politics and not apply it to us. And it would be a tragedy to have it be that data around us is wasted. The way to not waste it is to think of it as, what is the story of your life? What is your, what is the combination of the data about the dynamics of your living, the things you do, the things you eat, your goals, your medical history, all brought together to have a communication with you that's human. It's generated by a machine, but you own it, and it's human. And that's actually, I think it's a marvelous world to look at.
Do you think there are some possibilities as well, not just for sort of analyzing that kind of data, but also for a new category of, in quotes, traditional storytelling, or this fiction? Because I'm thinking of when sort of the techniques to create generative music came along. A lot of musicians said that it was the end of music, it was music created by computers, but it wasn't. It was just, the effort for creating music moving on to a different set of things, algorithms. Do you think that your technologies could also permit a new generation of writers to create algorithmically, or structures of language that would be driven by algorithms and data to create new kinds of stories like we know them?
I've been pilloried for various things I've said yes to in terms of what the technology can do in the past. So I hesitate. But understand that the core technology is really all about finding connections, finding correlations, finding trends, and actually, in many ways, discovering them in data. There is no reason why the data has to be from the real world. And there's no reason why the story that we create can't be based upon, on one hand, fictional data, and on the other hand, a notion of storytelling that goes beyond sort of the core journalistic, centric notion of story. We do a lot of work not in journalism, but we still have a very journalistic point of view on that work. But having a writer's point of view, a fiction writer's point of view, and embodying that in the technology is I would say, completely doable. I don't think it puts anything at risk because it's not a how do I put this? Just as our technology right now, I don't think puts anyone in journalism or data analytics at risk because it's an augmentation. It's doing what people often couldn't do. Anything in the realm that looks like fiction would be doing something. And I would say it probably would be at first being something that would be a brainstorming tool. But it would never, I think the machine that the story wants to tell you about its experiences and its understanding of your experiences in the world might not be the story that, as quite a human story as you might want to have another human tell you.
So we've just received a question that's come in from one of our followers online. So I'm going to share that, and it's identified by Reeves Collins, a professor at Northwestern. When you talk crunching numbers, I know my social scientist friends would be right with you. When you talk about narrative, I know my writer and artist friends would relate. How do you balance words and numbers in your company? How do you get numbers people and word people to talk to one another?
That's actually a great question, and it's a genuine challenge. But actually, the answer to that relates to the history of the technology. So the technology actually rose up out of partnership between students in computer science and students in journalism who were working on this project together. And the core technology is actually a marriage of engineering, which is embodied in data analytics, and journalism, storytelling. And so I would say we've been very lucky so far in that is our engineering team has greater communication skills than most engineering teams. And our editorial team has tremendous technical skills. And what they're working on really is based upon the idea that no one side is going to tell the other side what to do. That it's a partnership, and so we have a very much a culture of partnership in the company. Once you let that slip and have it be that the engineering is or the editorial side feels like they're bossing engineering around, or engineering feels like they know more and so they deserve more than editorial. Once that happens, you're in trouble. But as long as you get the idea that this is a partnership that really depends upon a genuine amalgamation of journalistic storytelling techniques and the analysis needed to get to the facts. And the facts will take you so far, and the story will take you so far, and it's only together that you can do the whole thing. And it's a hard culture to build. I think we've done a really good job of building it. And we're pushing on the notion of maintaining it. And I think part of it comes from, I would say, about a third of our staff, maybe a little less at this point, comes from some sort of collaborative effort in engineering and journalism. And so our chief architect is actually one of my PhDs, a fellow by the name of Nate Nichols, whose dissertation was on computational storytelling. And so he had to work with journalism. They had to work with him. He had to see it. And so he ends up being like a really sweet pivot point where he knows about journalism. He knows about the story. He knows about all of, he's like a phenomenal engineer. And all of that, he is the embodiment of what we want. And that is that great combination of man and machine in many ways. We see his role as being Iron Man. You got to have Tony Stark, the really brilliant guy, but he's going to be surrounded by this machine that can amplify everything he's doing, and that's what Nate is. and that's what the role of the company is, that's what the technology is, but everyone's got to see their part in doing that.
So we have another question that's come in from the virtual roundtable community, and I'm going to just simplify it a little bit, but what role have professional writers had alongside programmers in ensuring the quality and tone of the stories? How important is that?
It's crucial because I mean, the core system is built by engineers, which the system we call Quill. Is built by engineers, maintained by engineers, forwarded by engineers. The configuration of that system for any given kind of story we're going to write is done by our editorial team, which tend to be professional writers. That is a lot of journalism, a lot of people out of journalism, some people out of more marketing writing, financial, analytical writing, where their skills are communication skills. And they see their task as completely the task of looking at masses of data and communicating what's going on in that. And we go through an iterative process where they actually try to get the story. They try to get the story right at a conceptual level before they figure out what the words are going to be. As a result, they spend a lot of time thinking, introspecting about what it is they do as writers. And how they think, and that tends to be the special skill we look for when we're hiring an editorial. Is have you ever asked the question, how do I do that? And if we have someone who's a writer and a great writer, and they've never asked that question, we're less inclined to have them as part of the team. So people who are introspective about what their skills are and how those skills can be mapped onto the machine is important. Hold on a second. I'm having a power issue. So I'm gotta, and if I don't deal with it, I'm going to just disappear in a minute.
Well, as it happens, Chris, we're actually coming to the end of our 45-minute chat. So
awesome.
If anyone has one last question they'd like to put forward, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to politely say thank you. And I just think this was a wonderful opportunity for us to get to hear more of the amazing work you're doing. So I really appreciate your taking the time, and all of you for your great questions. I want to remind everyone that this is sort of the launch of the FoST Roundtable, virtual Roundtable series. So every week at sort of lunchtime Eastern time on Wednesdays, we'll be inviting a different speaker back to hang out with us and have a conversation. And we'll post the list of speakers that are coming. So we hope you'll join us for future chats. And again, my heartfelt thanks to all of you for joining us today. Look forward to seeing you next week.
All right. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, everybody. I had a marvelous time.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.